Are live.
We are. We're just going to give it some time for people to flow in. And then it's coming in hot and heavy, so we're good. Hi, everybody. We're going to start momentarily.
Drop your location into the comments if you're willing. Always good to know where people are calling in from. Helps us as we get through some of the content.
And for those wondering, that is not my piano. I do not play piano.
Although that would be quite the sight.
It would be quite the sight. Maybe I'll start.
All right, we got people coming from Philly, Montreal, Toronto, Saudi. Amazing. Good stuff. Some excited Toronto people. All right, we'll just give it one more minute and we'll get right into it. Chicago, New Jersey, Victoria. All right, good. Some good coverage.
You're well represented.
Right on. All right, well let's get into it. Obviously, thank you guys for joining us for another one of our webinars. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about unlocking value in music, art, and entertainment sponsorships. Obviously, we do a lot of work in sport, and sport I think also dominates a lot of the conversation out there when it comes to sponsorship and where investment's flowing. But I think we wanted to, we heard from a lot of you that you were interested in this topic, and we do a lot of work with brands investing in these spaces, with also some of these cultural properties, some of them that we're going to talk about today, and help kind of dive deeper into some of our hypotheses as to like why there are challenges, as well as perspectives that hopefully open up some people's eyes to the real opportunity that exists in the cultural sponsorship landscape. As a quick reminder, there's a few quick housekeeping items. You will all get a recording of today's webinar, so don't worry about that. We obviously, as if you are not joining for the first time, you should probably know or have a pretty good idea by this point that we love the interaction, we love the comments. Please share your perspectives. Like, the only reason we do these webinars is because generally we get some great discussion going, and we learn from you, and hopefully there's a couple things that you'll be able to walk away with as well. So please challenge our thoughts, our perspectives. The hope is that we can get stronger as an industry by having more conversations like this. But let's get started and let's get into it. So I think like we'd be kind of crazy to not start by addressing like a bit of an elephant in the room. And it's been a hell of a time and a ride for cultural sponsorships over the past 12, 24 months. At one point, it was almost like on a weekly basis, there was a cultural property that was kind of announcing that they were having financial struggles or corporate sponsorships that had been pulled. A lot of challenges, right? The good news is that there's a lot of them that are actually rebounding and finding their way, but it does definitely give us, I think, a bit of a pause to say, like, what is it about these properties or these sponsorships that is potentially posing a bit of a challenge? And more importantly than that, once we've addressed, what that challenge may be, like, what is the business case for these sponsorships? Obviously, there are a lot of brands investing in, music, art, entertainment. However, there has definitely been a trend, as of late, a change in pace, perhaps, to where the dollars are flowing. So that's really what we're going to get into today. I think when you look at like how difficult it's been, we always start the story with, okay, well, what does the consumer data tell us? What do we know about consumer interest and passion for these types of properties, be it attending a concert or a music festival, an art gallery? The reality is, and what you see here, and I know it's difficult to see on your screens, but ultimately what we're showing you is that big dip is, of course, COVID and the impact of closures, right? There's no question that has played a role and impacted, the way the dollars are flowing into these spaces. But the reality is that things have rebounded quite well. Consumer interest and passion is still certainly there. Another really interesting kind of angle to that is looking at the high value target of Gen Z, which I think there's tons of conversation around right now, as to like, how do we connect with them, right? These consumers are largely being talked about in terms of people who don't necessarily consume content the way that many of us did as we grew up. So are they watching TV? Less so. How are they consuming content? How are they actually engaging with brands? And the reality is that all of these different property types are actually doing exceedingly well with Gen Z. There's been a great rebound. So if the data tells us and points us to that point, then we're like, okay, there's interest there. Will it actually drive behavior? Will it drive purchase intent consideration for these brands that are getting active in the space? And the reality is that we know that brands who can deliver on a feeling, an emotion, a connection through sponsorship are going to get the benefit, right? You look at this as an example, and there's a laundry list of other purchase drivers that we track on an ongoing basis. But brand purchase because the brand makes me feel good, purchase because the brand helps motivate me or helps create a memory. Those are among some of the top performing purchase drivers, and you compare those just very quickly as a simple comparison to the purchase because of something I saw on YouTube or Instagram. I mean, there's a lot of money being spent, obviously, in advertising and media. We're not saying these things are exactly apples to apples, but we know that if you can create a memory, if you can make people feel good as they experience something, that there's an opportunity to actually reach them, connect with them, and impact your business and deliver outcomes. So what are the reasons then that there's been a challenge, right? Where are the dollars flowing? Neil's going to get into it a bit more in a minute. But we decided we'd talk through kind of a few of our hypotheses. These are things that we've heard or things that we believe could be at stake, and things that we're going to hopefully demystify over the next 40 minutes or so. One thing we believe and we've heard is it's easier to sell a sports sponsorship through to senior leadership. It's easier for people to understand, right? So how do we circumvent that? How do we address that? You're going to see some of the data today of how we can help you do that. Second hypothesis, it's more complicated to develop a clear business case as media still guides value. Media tied to sport is a lot easier, right? Linear broadcast deals, you've got assets that are broadcast visible. When you're in the cultural sponsorship space, it's not always that clear cut. So it takes and requires a bit more thinking as to how do we value this. But there's a model for that. And it's not that complex. It's just a slightly nuanced way of looking at the value you get out of a sponsorship, but might be something that is causing headwinds for this space. If you look at then what's required, I think there's been a sense, or we've certainly gotten a sense from several brands that there's this idea that it's going to take more time to develop something creative and powerful. Sport can kind of be like out of the box. Here are your assets. Give me your logo. Let's go. Whereas in the cultural space, it might take a bit more time. Might take a bit more energy, a bit more creative flex to get to a place where you have something that's really worth kind of pushing to market. And I think the last hypothesis that we've heard and that we have is that there's this semblance of we're going to need to overinvest in activation to break through with impact. So it's going to take a lot more work, time, and then also money to be able to show up in a way that's going to be really meaningful. So I think those are some hypotheses, some things that we've heard. But the other thing that we've heard from you, because we've gone out and spoken to many of you about what are the the good, the bad, the ugly of the sponsorship industry. Brands are increasingly looking for opportunities to break through, and we know that cultural properties actually have a much better opportunity to deliver ownable, less cluttered, more kind of clean environments for brands to actually break through. And that's something that we hear loud and clear from many of you who've answered this survey and who have told us that. So there's these hypotheses that are causing perhaps friction, but there's also a need in the marketplace from brands to create ownable IP and to stand up and to stand out and to not necessarily have to pay, hand over fist for a greater share of voice in an environment that's very cluttered. So there is a need, there are some challenges, but maybe a couple of perspectives that we have. One, we believe cultural partnerships give big spenders a great opportunity to hit an ad frequency to their weight. So if you're spending in sport and you want to reach your target, find the property that is going to deliver on your target and add that in as a frequency play. Hit them from multiple angles when it comes to passion points. The other thing that we think is a really interesting opportunity for cultural partnerships, they're a gateway for challengers. So those small, medium-sized brands that are challenging. In Canada, of course, there perhaps is less or a smaller mid-market than there is in the States, but we see it happening every day now. There are different brands that are popping up, getting involved in the sponsorship space. And I think that's a great target, a great way for them to get into the sponsorship arena through cultural partnerships that we know can deliver. We think there's a great opportunity to create ownable programs, museums, art galleries, music festivals, you name it. There are needs, there are things that people care deeply about, and there are great ways for us to create cultural partnerships that deliver long-term IP value. And lastly, which Neil's going to get into a bit more now, is we know that these partnerships can deliver outsized ROI. The investment and the cost of getting in the door within the world of sport, mostly, in most cases, not all cases, is exorbitant. It's significant. It's not for everybody. If you actually break it down and look at the cost per person that you're reaching or that you're impacting, we know cultural partnerships stand to deliver great value, which is why we're having this conversation today. But with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Neil, who's going to walk you through a lot of the data that helps support this business case that we hope you can make use of as you're considering your options, consulting with brands or properties that are in this space.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. So yes, we are now going to dive into the wonderful world of cultural marketing and sponsorship marketing in cultural events outside of sport. As Adam kind of alluded to, a lot of what we're going to talk about now is the same as what Adam had just spoken about, but we're going to root ourselves in consumer and in people. And we're going to bring proof points, not from us and not from a hypothesis that we think, again, based on and rooted in experience, but from Canadians and consumers at large and what they're doing and how they value cultural partnerships. So without further ado, let's start at the starting point of decision making when it comes to sponsorship marketing, which I think that we know as an industry often starts and stops with sport. If you look at from the Canadian sponsorship landscape study, the investment that is being given to sport versus other sponsorship opportunities, about 70% of the investments that we're spending currently as, again, an industry go towards sport, 50% towards professional sports, 18% toward amateur, and then the rest towards festivals, causes, and arts. So that's a big investment highlighted toward, again, that sport and sport landscape. So what we're now going to start to investigate is how warranted that variance in investment is relative to consumer behavior, relative to reaching consumers, reaching your target audience, and then converting those target audience into purchasers of your product. So there is no denying that sport and sports reach relative to some of the other opportunities that we're going to talk about today, like lifestyle and entertainment, festival, cause, etc. Sport does offer, from a professional perspective, greater reach in terms of number of Canadians. So what we did is looked at the average of the top 15 properties that we have, and we have thousands of them on our platform. This is the average of the top 15. So on average, sport delivers 1.4 million and nearly 1.5 million more people than lifestyle and entertainment, all the way down to arts. So that we know. What about from an impact perspective? Is that engagement and connection with somebody converting into them being more likely to buy a product or a brand because of that sponsorship and because of that investment? And again, when you look at the numbers, you do see sport leading other opportunities in sponsorship. So those are facts. Sport does offer greater reach. Again, there's exceptions to every rules. There's causes and territories and festivals that outperform certain sports and professional sports. But overall, from a top to top perspective, you do see sport properties outperforming others when it comes to both engagement and as well as impact. Okay. But if you look at the variance in these numbers and the spread between them, which is what we're starting to doing, what we then ask ourselves and consider is that investment difference, so 70% going to sport, 50% going to professional sport, warranted relative to the impact and the engagement that each offers independently as well as together. So we talked about sport being 50% of sponsorship investments in Canada. When you aggregate and size the number of Canadians that have been impacted by a sponsorship for professional sports versus non-sports. So you add everything up, you take that entire universe, sport accounts for 18% of people that have gone out and bought because of sponsorship. Everything outside of sport accounts for 82%. Again, there's nuance between properties. Yes, we know that. The 18% is comprised of one vertical versus 6 verticals, but it starts to demonstrate and show you the potential outside of sport And again, we're not thinking of these all the time as exclusive. I have to do sport or I have to do something else. There's also that integration story, and we'll talk through that. But the starting point of any decision to invest in any sponsorship vertical, sport or other, is to start to identify and size that opportunity that we're faced with or that's in front of us before we start to invest hardworking dollars against them. I'm going to slow down a little bit because I like to present quickly. I'm not sure if anybody's asking questions yet,
No
but
questions yet.
come on, everybody. We want some engagement. So please do ask questions as we go. We're happy to stop and have small scale discussions. We don't want to go too far past two. We don't want to go past two. All right. So consumer passion points span many verticals, and so does the opportunity to connect. So as we're thinking about our approach and our plan and what we're going to invest in, it's important to recognize and consider that somebody isn't just a sports fan. They're a fan of multiple, again, verticals, experiences, and those sorts of things. So if we start to size fans of outside sport opportunities, we start to see that they're in the millions and millions of Canadians every year. So over 12 million Canadians every year say they have attended a concert or a community event. 10 million cultural festivals and music festivals. I'm not going to read through each one, but you can see that attending a play is almost at 10 million people. So we're starting to open our eyes to opportunities that we perhaps hadn't thought of because, scratching our head, we were like, well, are there enough people all in this audience to begin with to warrant an investment or consideration? And oftentimes that answer is yes. We just don't have that data or proof point to back it up. So you see film festivals there at over 9 million, all the way down to attending a sneaker show, which is nearly 3 million Canadians every year. We talked about, though, multiple passion points. The cool, we think cool, I think cool thing about this is that all of those attendants, going to a concert, going to a music festival, going to Comic-Con, over-index with sports fans. So this talks about that integration, and it doesn't have to be that exclusive one or the other. You can connect with the audience you're connecting with through some of your sports partnerships by, again, increasing what you're doing in your portfolio into areas of interest to those people that you connect with through your sport partnership. So in all of these instances, some more than other, concerts and local festivals, mostly, but all of these over-index with sport enthusiasts and sport fans. Okay, so it's, again, that same passion point with that same target audience, an opportunity for a brand perhaps to speak to and connect with that consumer on multiple passion points and emotional connections that they have.
Really quickly, Neil, there's been a couple questions just around data and whether we have the U.S. data. Of course, we have the U.S. data. We're going to talk mostly to Canada, but we're happy to share the U.S. equivalent data as well. There's a question around do we see significant changes? There's definitely some puts and takes when you look at percentage base and obviously the size of the population, of course, that engage with any of these or take part in any of these activities. The changes and the differences are more or less modest generally, but there will be a couple things that will swing or that will rank in different orders, but we'll certainly share that. But yeah, keep the questions coming. We appreciate it.
Please do. And yes, we do. Yes, as Adam alluded to, we have all of this same information in the US, and there is slight difference in nuance, not necessarily drastic, but we can get to that after the fact. Good questions. Keep the conversation coming. So let's dive now into cultural partnerships and the fact that they go beyond visibility, beyond awareness, beyond an impression into a meaningful connection. And then we're going to start to talk about what that meaningful connection, when you've done it right, what it means for you in terms of outcomes, both in awareness as well as in driving incremental purchasing. But let's set the stage with what that emotional connection is when somebody is at an event. So in terms of their emotional state and when and where we're able to speak to them when they're in that emotional state. So the first thing we asked everybody in the surveys we've done to define and describe a typical weekday. And these are the words that they've used. I mean, not right now. Everybody right now is going to be on the right when I show you that slide. But traditionally, outside of a Sponsor Pulse webinar, we are bored, we are busy, we are tired. Some of us have fun no matter what. Love those people. But it's a lot. There's a lot that we're taking in. And then we said to people, tell us how you feel, and you kind of describe how you're feeling and your emotions when you're at an event or a festival. And you can just see the difference in words that people are using, and you can just feel that emotion that comes out of them when they are somewhere having fun at a cultural event, music festival, Comic-Con, etc. They're excited, they're happy. Some are bored. You can't please everybody. There's 20% that are just going to be bored no matter what you do. Have at it. Some are drunk, you see there. But again, for the most part, there's a huge difference. That is the opportunity, because that's where we as brands, through cultural events and festivals and those sorts of things, sports also, but this is specific to cultural events and festivals, that is the mood in which we're able to speak to people and connect with them on when they're in. Let's talk about attributes associated with music, art, entertainment, events, cultural, those types of things. We took sport out. We asked these for each of those types of events. This is an average aggregated. And the reason I'm telling you that is because the next slide is going to split out the difference. So I'm just setting the stage. But beyond providing fun and enjoyable experiences, which is number one overall on average for cultural events, it is also about strengthening the local economy. So there are benefits that exceed just having fun, experiencing new things and meeting new people, bringing communities together. Those are the top ones. Very close to those are bringing families together, introducing newcomers to my country, Canada, US, wherever you're from. Expanding knowledge and intellect, community connectiveness, sense of pride and community, sense of well-being, community spirit. So I'm not going to read through each one. I pretty much did read through each one, but the story is that the benefit for partners and sponsors does far exceed people just having fun and thinking about us when they're having fun. It can go into areas like education, like diversity and inclusion, like well-being and physical, those sorts of things. But
sorry, Neil. I was just going to say, I think
please.
that also it provides a bit of a roadmap, right? I mean, I think as we we often talk about like the properties specifically, like what are we sponsoring, what's available within music, cause talk about the Junos, talk about ROM, talk about, you name it, a property. We have that data, of course, but like to take a step or zoom out a little bit and think about like what the benefits are, the attributes that are associated to these types of properties also gives, I think, brands and rights holders who are in this space the ability to talk and to quantify, the power and the impact that they can have. This is a great roadmap to basically say, like, where do we want to lean in as a brand, right? Like, do we want to lean into more of the education space or the family and the community connection, meeting new people? There's so many different ways and avenues that we can use this data to help guide how you activate, how you show up, to continue to build on the way that these properties are being perceived. So a great tool, I think, as people are planning for how they show up in culture.
Yeah, and you nailed it, Adam. It's about where I show up, because what aligns with my brand, but it extends further, and you mentioned this, into activation and my idea for the proper IP program or activation or positioning, right? That helps me kind of understand where I should lean into, and it helps the agency understand what to develop based on the emotional or shared connections that a brand has with the property.
Absolutely. Neil, I think we might be getting ahead of it, but I want to address it because it's a great question. Victoria just asked, have you noticed any difference in excitement between general event attendees and those who engage with brand activations?
We're going to get there. The answer is yes. And I'm just going to leave you with that so that you stick around till we get there.
It's coming. Yeah.
It's coming, but the answer is undeniably yes. Before we get into that, we do have to remind ourselves that emotional pillars and connections are different for every property and every property type, right? Most have like 2 or 3 reasons why fan passion exists, but there are over indexes. So as Adam was talking about, from a strategy perspective and a good roadmap in terms of where I should be investing based on where I want to be as a brand, that one slide we showed you earlier is inclusive aggregate average, but there's differences, right? Music festivals will over-index in fun and enjoyable. Cultural festivals, newcomers, all the way through to food festivals, experiencing new things as an over-index. Pride festivals, enhancing moral and values. Causes, teaching important life lessons. So there's differences, and what you want to do is you want to learn what those differences are, where those passion points lie for anything you're considering independently, never as an aggregate, because they will change and they will be different. And for you to be most successful, they should align with your brand and where your brand wants to be and where you want to take your brand. So connecting authentically through passion drives measurable results. We've talked a lot about benefits of outside sport opportunities from a reach and consumer impact potential overall. Now let's look at a case study. So for one of our clients, we measured all of these verticals: sport, award show, community festivals, just checking out the time, causes, and arts. Okay. And the very first thing we start with is reach. How many people does our partner or can our partner reach? What is that ceiling for each of the opportunities? So the ceiling for the professional sport organization that they sponsored far exceeded that of the awards show, all the way down to the arts festivals. So we went to 11, from 11.5 at our high to 1.2 million at the lowest point, which is the arts. So that's sizing the opportunity and helps shape the investment decisions because it gives us some context.
Sorry, Neil,
Entering
can you just go
evidence.
back really quickly? Because I think that it is an important kind of like first thing that like to demystify, right? I think that like oftentimes we talk about comparing properties that are available, and we'll talk about, in a particular market, you've got a bunch of sports teams, and of course you've got the leagues. But the reality is that like the way that we measure engagement applies to all properties. And I think that that's like something that was very calculated that we did when we started this business 8 years ago. Was we wanted to ensure that we had a methodology that was consistent in the way that we could measure consumer engagement and passion and impact across all of these properties. So even this, just in and of itself, if you're ever looking to kind of compare yourselves as a rights holder to other rights holders, you can do that. And it's literally a click of a button on our platform, or give us a call. If you want to see what the difference is across your portfolio and how and what the reach looks like across the different properties that you're considering or that you're currently sponsoring or that you might in the future consider sponsoring, it's a great way to immediately kind of like check everybody at the door and say, this isn't just a philanthropic giving opportunity. Like there's millions of people still, right? Even on the right-hand side of this page, this arts property that you're speaking to is still over 1 million people that a brand can actually reach, engage, and connect with. And based on the price point that these different properties or property types command, it does start to bring into question. You're like, well, where am I getting the value? So I just wanted to quickly pause on that because I think there's a wealth of insight that is available, and you can size these properties using the same ruler, the same metric, with consistency, dating back now to 2018. So it's there for the taking.
Absolutely. And then we take it a step further. So that is all excellent points in terms of the sizing the opportunity. And then to start to get at value investment ratio and right sizing those things, what we start to then think about is, okay, that's the ceiling, but what is my potential to make something from that audience, make something being breakthrough, generate awareness, and convert into impact. And as Adam alluded to, it's the same system, regardless if it's a pro sport or an arts or film festival. It's the same model. It's the same questions. It's the same metrics. Those metrics are built for brands to be able to make decisions and properties to be able to communicate their benefits and potential benefits. So that was your overall reach from a millions perspective. Adam talked about earlier that, with size and popularity often comes clutter. So the first bar there, which I'm going to fancy the animatics there, speaks to, we ask people to name a brand or sponsor that comes to mind when they think about the sport or the awards show, etc. And you can see that the sport that we chose, well, it had 3 million more people or more, also came with many more partners being mentioned, which means more clutter. Then we asked awareness for various sponsors of each of these. There was, I think, 12 in total. And you can see there's a correlation that comes with less clutter equals more awareness on average for partners. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. Arts and film, which has the least clutter, didn't have as much awareness as the causal association. There's always reasons for why that exists. But more often than not, you do see this correlation. Sports are bigger, but they do come with more people wanting to leverage that opportunity, which is more clutter, which could mean less likelihood for me to break through as a proportion of fans. What about impact? So does each of these, or did each of these opportunities for sponsoring brands enhance brand favorability, so brand equity and attitudinal in that middle of the funnel? And did they ultimately drive purchasing and purchase consideration, which is that bottom of the funnel? And you can see again, as a proportion of those who were aware of the sponsoring brands, on average, the outside sport as a proportion did enhance equity at a better rate than the sports property, and did drive purchase consideration at a better rate slightly than the sports property as a proportion of fans. Bringing us back to rooting ourselves again into right sizing expectations. So those were good results across the board. A lot of it are amongst different audiences, right? And different sized audiences. So we started at the 11 or whatever that number was. I think it was 11 point something million for the sports property. So 30% awareness of that is almost the same from a number of people perspective as 70% for a smaller number. So when you look at the actual numbers, the sports property did deliver more people who were aware of sponsors and more people who were incrementally more likely to buy. But then you get into the ratio that we talked about earlier, not to the tune of 50%, right? So yes, the investment was warranted to be higher, but there still was ample opportunity, and we drove significant successes outside of the sport partnerships. Through how we activated and what we talked about from a positioning perspective. Any questions so far?
In here, I think the headline is like, it's not like culture versus sport, right? Like I think naturally, like what we see is that those who spend significantly are trying to leverage and find ways to leverage cultural partnerships to amplify sport, or vice versa.
Right.
And so I think we're not trying to say don't invest in sport. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why sport is getting the lion's share, but there certainly is a business case here, and this case study certainly proves and highlights that there's a lot of reasons to consider some of these other properties and verticals that are within the realm of culture, be it art, music, or otherwise. And that the size of the impact that you can have, the size of the reach that you can have is significant, especially when you consider the level of investment. So for brands that are challenging some of their competitors who might have, an outsized budget advantage, this is an interesting way to get in the door to have, impact in market, leveraging some of these other properties and verticals that clearly do deliver on moving the needle, both from a reach and an impact perspective.
Absolutely. Any questions in the chat so far?
Yeah, there is one. So Andy just asked, is this based on going to one game, seeing one show, or going to one day of a festival, or is it multiple days?
So the ones that we've evaluated are multiple, but the sports property had more. And that factors in. It's a great question. It's a great point. When we are valuing assets or any opportunity, that factors into that valuation, which is that kind of lifetime value, if you will, or time period value of having somebody be aware and somebody being impacted. And that there is a difference between sports and an awards show or a community festival or event. So those factors come into play when we are valuing and sizing an opportunity in terms of how long lasting that awareness and impact will be based on the window of opportunity. Hopefully you can't hear my dog barking, but she's going a little nuts. Bear with me. So that and Adam kind of bucketed very nicely in terms of the talk track so far, which is really just identifying and putting a spotlight on the opportunities beyond sport. sport, not again taking away from sport, because we've shown you continuously that the investment in sport is warranted in terms of the number of people sports can reach and impact. But so too is investment outside of sport, if it makes sense for your brand and for your portfolio. But there are various opportunities in which we can generate, my dog's going nuts, but through non-sports opportunities. Let's talk about how to make the most of every opportunity from an activation perspective. Whether you're investing in sport, whether you're investing in music or cause or culture or entertainment, the recipe for success doesn't change. And you've heard it ad nauseum probably by now over the past 10 years in the industry, that you have to activate to win, which is true. What you don't get talked, or what doesn't get talked about perhaps as much, is what does activation mean, and what are the buckets of activation? How do I activate? What does activation look like? There's a very big difference between activations that are associative, demonstrative, and celebrative. Okay. Activations that are associative are more static in nature. They communicate that you're a partner, but they don't go far beyond that. Once you start getting into bringing the brand into your house, or I'm sorry, bring the property into your house, ultimately to where we want to be, which is making that fan or attendee experience better when I'm there, that's where we win as sponsors in any property and in any vertical. So now I'm going to answer, because I promised I would, that question from, I don't know, probably 25 minutes ago now, which is there a difference between just somebody who's attending versus somebody who's aware of that a brand's there versus somebody who interacts and somebody who's kind of there, being there with the brand, enjoying that experience? Hopefully the person who, did I get that question right? Are we on the same track? Okay. And I mentioned earlier, the answer is yes. As interaction and engagement goes up in terms of being aware that the brand is there, through whatever channels, knowing that they're there, but not necessarily being engaged or interacting with that brand, to then being exposed to what they're doing all the way through to participating in what they're doing, that's where impact, when done right, because we've seen the reverse, right? We've seen activations, experiential activations that don't do this, but when done right, this is what should happen. Your ability through any of these partnerships to connect with somebody one-on-one, tap into that conversation based on emotional connection and those sorts of things, starts to convert simple awareness into meaningful impact. The person who typed the question, thumbs up or down in terms of if we've answered that.
Let you know as soon as I see.
Okay. So let's talk about bringing it all together, and then we'll just open up the floor to conversation. Adam spoke about it a lot. We all know it. We're all faced with it. We all live it every day. Things are complex right now, to say the least. There's a lot going on in all of our lives, which means in your target consumer's life, there is a lot going on, which makes breakthrough, impact, and those types of things more difficult, because we're contending with other factors in their life beyond us being there, having fun with them at a festival and event. When and where we connect with people on things that matter and mean something to them, that passion point, and we talk to them in terms of recognizing we're here because we know you're passionate about it too, and we are as well. So not try to be something that they're not, but be why they're there. That's where we start to win and break through and help them have a better time. And then at the end of the day, we always need to keep that fan or attendee focus in mind, because it has to be about them, not us. Making their day experience life better when we're there, because we're there. And that's how to win. But it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We talked about it not being a one-size-fits-all approach earlier, in terms of music having different benefits, for example, than cultural festivals, than pride festivals, etc. That's one differentiation, which is that rooted emotional connection that people have and that passion point that people have with a property. But so too is the opportunity in terms of category purchasers. So for each of these examples, and the list is long, we've picked the top categories. if you look at the top categories in terms of likelihood to be impacted by a Junos partnership versus a ROM partnership versus an ALS versus a Montreal Jazz Festival, some of them overlap, but most of them are different, right? So as a brand and as a property, knowing and recognizing where that best opportunity is to align with that more natural alignment and association is an excellent starting point for all of us, because it will lift success potential to a higher level based on, again, that passion point and that relevancy of audience. So I'm not going to read through each one of these, but again, you can clearly see some differences. Like for Junos, luxury vehicles there. For ROM, there's purchasing furniture or public transportation or international foods. For ALS, personal care, vitamins and supplements, and insurance, lottery tickets also there. And then for Montreal Jazz Festivals, you got some CBD in there, you got some vodka in there, you got mortgage, you have dating apps. Again, you can see the difference, and it starts to point towards the difference in personality of the opportunity, which starts to point us in the what's the personality of our brand and where do we want to be? Then how do we show up?
Yeah, it's an important kind of highlight, right? Because I think what we see often, what we hear often from brands is that it's like they're flooded with more and more opportunities that are coming up, new properties or existing properties that are, obviously there's a pretty steady flow of investment requests and proposals that are going out. But I think being able to get down to the level of, where is the target and who is there? I mean, obviously there are lots of tools out there now that help you prospect and find the right people to communicate with, and you can use one of many different AI tools to get a full background on the company and the business and their state and the context of what they're kind of living through. But taking it even a step further to understanding like where is the fan overlap, right, in between the Junos audience and those who are seeking business consulting or who are seeking home energy providers. Like, it just helps contextualize and say, we know that your fans are here, that they're in our audience, and we can find an opportunity to really connect with them and to deepen that level of engagement, which I think really starts to stand out and starts to paint a picture of, we know who our fan base is, we know who your customers are, and there's an opportunity that we can tackle together to move the needle. And this data all is literally available at the click of a button, or send us an email, or you can scan this QR code.
Scan the QR. There you go.
But I think that it's funny. It's like we have 4,000 people now, roughly, that use our insights platform in different capacities, right? So I'm not saying that everybody's in there every day, but the data in there is unlocks a ton of opportunity and highlights probably new opportunities that for many they haven't probably considered or thought of or saw. So when you think about the number of categories, new categories popping up, new properties coming up in this space or within the world of sport, and being able to compare, contrast, and see where the fan overlap is, where the target fit is, it certainly starts to build a really interesting business case as to why you're having a conversation, why you're prospecting that brand for an opportunity. And then, of course, as Neil highlighted throughout, the business case is there, right? There's millions of people who are engaging with cultural properties and throughout these passion points. That does come down to like the properties themselves are reaching millions of people, right? A lot of these properties have physical footprints, whether they be for a weekend or whether they be permanent fixtures that are there year round. So when you think of like sport versus it, I understand is like very initially you're kind of like, yeah, they're very different. So we have to think about them differently. But if you actually look at it underneath it all, there are metrics, there are ways to look at these different opportunities with the same consistent measurement ruler, be it from the fan base and the size of that fan base to the way that those assets are valued, and ultimately to the impact that these properties can deliver in the marketplace. And we know certainly that they can deliver outsized returns. So certainly, hopefully, is an area that people will continue to consider. I think there's been, as we said, tough times. But the data and certainly the insights on the outcomes that these partnerships deliver certainly supports that it's going to be an area where brands are going to continue to invest. And I think as the struggle for white space and for an environment that's clean and less cluttered, not necessarily having to outshout dozens of other partners that are spending millions in the space, I think those things will certainly help the cultural partnership kind of segment continue to thrive and hopefully kind of rebound fully from those COVID days. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. If there are any questions, comments, feedback, there's been lots of like good discussion throughout. One question that we hadn't covered yet from Jim, he said, can that early on slide, Neil, can that slide be summarized as non-pro sports properties drive significantly higher purchase intent than pro sports properties? I think it was the slide earlier on.
The case study
where you're
slide?
comparing. I think you were comparing them.
Okay, so the answer is in that instance, yes, but it has to be caveated. There has to be the caveat of relative to the audience and size. So what you often see is smaller properties, smaller again from a total number of people perspective, often will have a more intrinsic, passionate following proportionately. So you can have 100 people versus 1,000 people. Of the 100 people, 75 of them are passionate. Of the 1,000 people, 500 are passionate. The more passionate your fan base is proportionately, the more likely they are to be impacted. So the answer is yes. Often cultural festivals, cultural events, cultural properties can convert at a strong degree on average, but the scale is less than some other larger properties. So the talk track works, but we just need to, again, always be mindful of the right sized facts as well, which we'll always bring to the table and into conversation.
Comment, I think, which is a really good one around like TV advertising signage is not really activation, right? It's more like that associative, tying yourself to a property. Whereas promotions, contests, on-site experiences, all those things are really where like the celebration kicks in, where you start to see more of that impact. So I think just kind of like echoing the point and leaning into the data to help you tell that story. I think for a lot of properties, it's like, it's great to get the deal done. And then you're like, wait a minute, like, what are you going to do to activate or to bring this to life? I think there's a lot of data within certainly that we have that supports that, like, you can't just show up and slap a logo. I mean, I guess you can, but it's not going to work. It's not going to break through and have the same impact as if you really think through how do we show up in a meaningful way to connect with and add value to those consumers.
And there's also a difference between a static, just my logo there. And again, all of them get some value. It's how much we're talking about. But there's a difference between, a static media or asset that is just your logo versus something static that is also your positioning and your communication and what you're creatively talking about. It doesn't have to be a promotion. It can be kind of why we're there, why we're a part of that experience. Those are two different things as well. So positioning your brand in the right way, talking about why you're there is going to matter more if it's about, again, on a relevant platform, than just simply putting your logo out there and hope that it's going to make a difference.
Well said. There's one a question that just came through, and then we'll probably let people go. Do you ever calculate a cost per conversion rate to compare big ticket sports opportunities to smaller properties?
Well, this is your
yes,
wheelhouse.
Absolutely. I mean, like, absolutely. I think there's a couple different ways to look at that, right? There's like the valuation of assets, which is one way. But I think that your point, Jim, is like a really good one, where ultimately, if you look at and with many partners or brands where we're evaluating several different sponsorships across different verticals, we can actually break it down to what is the cost per person that you reached and impacted. And that's where like the investment that is made, be it the rights fees plus the activation and anything else, the production that goes into it, like that's where you can really get more forensic with where are we getting the greatest impact, right? If you can compare those apples to apples, the same common denominator of your investment and what you put into it, you can get at that cost per person impacted, which we think is like the best way of being able to assess a portfolio and understand what's working well, what's not. It helps with portfolio planning and saying, what do we steal with pride from this partnership and apply it over here. It also helps with rationalization, which I know is not a fun conversation to have, but it's ultimately the reality of the world that we live in, and what comes at certain times in the economy. So yeah, absolutely. I think it just comes down to having that data. So even if you don't share your investment decisions or your investment levels with others, if you have the ability to break it down to a population of people and get get a quant metric for that, there certainly is a really natural way to be able to compare them in with one common kind of ruler and measurement system.
Excellent.
Cool.
That was good discussion. Thank you.
That's us with 1 minute to spare. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining and putting up with people walking in my background and a dog barking uncontrollably at Neil's house or his chalet that it looks like. We appreciate you guys tuning in and always being so vocal, asking questions and contributing. Let us know if there's any other topics that you want to that you would be interested in us covering. And thank you again for joining. But enjoy the rest of your weeks and enjoy the last few days of summer.
Thanks, everybody.